Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Today we are holding a new meeting of the ValgrAI Research Unit. This is now the 10th edition, I think so, no? Today is a special occasion because we are joined by members of our scientific council, to whom we will be able to present some of the research projects currently underway in our research unit. And in this way, we'll be able to receive their feedback and recommendation. We are fortunate to have a joint research unit comprising to 84 leading researchers from the 5 public universities in Comunitat Valenciana. Today we have a delegation from among them here with us, 6 of whom will be telling us about the latest work they are carrying out. Many thanks to everyone to taking part of this meeting. The plan is for each talk to last 15 minutes, followed by 5 minutes for questions and answers. Without further ado, let's begin with the first presentation. Then the first presentation is Human-Centered AI Privacy by José Miguel from INGENIO UPV. José.
There we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I think it's the first time I address the UMI and also the council, so I'll just say very briefly about me. I'm based at INGENIO, which is a joint venture between Universitat Politécnica de Valencia and the Spanish National Research Council, where I'm actually a research professor. I'm also adjunct professor at UPV, and among other previous things I did, I was full professor at King's College London, where I founded and directed the King's Cybersecurity Center. So my research is at the intersection of 3 broad fields: AI, cybersecurity, ACI. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about this intersection that you see there. Particularly, I'm going to focus on privacy. Okay, so big question here of how privacy respecting AI is, and how particularly we are very interested in the human part of it, so how users interact and perceive AI systems. But what's privacy? So we had sort of like similar question yesterday with Virginia about AI, but today it's going to be about privacy. So there's no agreed definition, but we know it's something that is quite old. It existed even in primitive societies. It's clearly written in some documents as early as in the 15th century BC. But the actual, sort of like first definition of privacy was given by these 2 guys who were legal scholars. And actually one of them was, his family was being subject to ruthless gossip in the media, facilitated by the rise of instantaneous photographs. So they defined it as, the right to be let alone. From this, in the sort of like 10th century, there have been 4 main ways of not just defining, but looking at privacy and what it is. So I'm going to just briefly go through them to give this sort of like this broad perspective of what privacy is. One of them is confidentiality, and that's, very mainstream nowadays in AI and AI models. We care a lot about what the models may leak, okay? Who might have access to that. This relates to this security property, which is, quite used in computer security, in the computer security field, which is confidentiality. So there's a property that says that, only those authorized should have access to some information. When this doesn't happen, there is a breach of confidentiality. Normally, this conceptualization of privacy says that if the data that was compromised was personal, then there was a privacy breach. So confidentiality normally is achieved through encryption, when you have HTTPS between, in a browser, when you browse the internet, or differentially private mechanisms, which are used a lot nowadays to train AI models. But it's not the only sort of like way to look at privacy. There is also more the, let's say, legal perspective that look at the rights of people, right? And there's a long tradition, started actually by these guys that I mentioned before in the 19th century, of what the rights people should have about them and their data, okay? So this centers around this right of, you should be able to tell for yourself, decide what information about you is communicated on to others and how it is being used. And this has influenced regulations around the globe, including the GDPR, and has some sort of like assumptions behind it, which is, for instance, the privacy calculus theory that says, people make decisions based on the benefits or the risks in sharing information. And they do that in a rational way somehow. And this also leads to this notion, very used from this conceptualization, which is privacy notice and choice. So you give people the notice of what's going to happen with their data, they can choose, right? We know one specific instance of this where it turned quite wrong, which is like, obviously cookies. You are giving a notice, a long one, which we obviously don't read, and then you are not quite given a choice. It's like either accept or pay, right? So, but this conceptualization of privacy, so that's sort of like privacy too. And there is also privacy boundary regulation, which is grounded on sociology and the theories of Allman and others that came after him, and that define privacy as sort of like this interpersonal boundary regulation process. Okay? So it's all about social relationships and how we manage, how we interact with others, what we share with them, how this information that we share with them changes as the relationship evolves. Okay? And this nowadays is understood through Petronius' communication privacy management theory that basically talks about that, what happens with data, when we share data with other humans, how we manage that. And that has been particularly useful to understand how people behave online, for instance, in social media, how they have data that in theory, is owned by different people, how they share that data, also in smart homes, okay? And then there is the other sort of like conceptualization of privacy, main one that is contextual integrity, which is, everything depends on the context. Everything can be a violation or not, depending on when it is happening and what flows of information are happening, okay? So there are some sort of like rules that, govern this flow of information. And then one example is that, what you tell your doctor, you may not tell your employer, right? So it's usually, defined through these sort of like parameters of sender, subject, recipient. And so this is an information flow, depending on who's going to receive the data, the principles that are there, or what the data is about, or who the data is about, changes the notion of, if there is a privacy implication or not, okay? And more recent scholars argue that, all these four conceptualizations of privacy are privacy, and they can, in many ways and in different ways, lead to what could be considered a privacy violation, or, what is appropriate or not in different contexts. So how do we go around analyzing privacy in systems such as, AI, agents, autonomous systems, and which actually can do actions by their own, right? So we argue that we should focus on the information, the activities they do with information, okay? So starting from, the data that is being collected, processed, managed, and disseminated. So how do we go around this? So for instance, in terms of information collection, there is something that is called surveillance, where there is, some system with AI that is collecting data about you that you are not even aware of that collection. What was that? Anyway, then there is also interrogation, okay? You are aware of that, and it can be, very appropriate. For instance, if you need to tell an autonomous car where to bring you, you have to say the information of where you want to go, otherwise you're not going anywhere, right? But there could be other cases, and we will see an example later, where this could not be the case, okay? Then data that is being collected will be processed, and that's particularly the case with AI systems that are going to do all sorts of inferences, right? So, and this can actually be used, this processing of information can be used to single you out from others. Coming back to the autonomous car, maybe it needs to know it is you who is the owner, who is going to be, let into the car, okay? or it's going to put together different pieces of information that has been collected, has been already inferred or not, and it's going to infer more information about you and build a whole profile about who you are, what you like, and everything like that. And that can actually be used later by the system to make decisions about you, which in some cases may not be accurate or fair. In terms of the data, the system will keep data that has collected from you and has processed for you, okay? So there are things like, there could be leakage from a confidentiality perspective. There is an attack, and we know agents in particular, or the example here of autonomous cars, they are subject to some attack vectors that can leak information, okay? And there is also the problem, particularly because machine learning models, we are talking about some specific type of AI, will make inferences that obviously aren't going to be perfect every time. So sometimes the inferences could be wrong. So inferences made about you could be wrong, and decisions made about you could be wrong too as a result. And you can't influence that. Okay, that's the problem. That's why it's called exclusion. So data is inferred about you that may be wrong. You can't do anything about it. And also, particularly for learning systems that learn about you, the problem about, we are talking about rights, the right to be forgotten. So how do you actually make the system forget about you where there is a whole system that is learning, and there is a lot of research now you might have heard about on the topic of machine learning. And then there is also dissemination. So if there's an agent, it's going to collaborate with other agents. So it's going to pass some of your information to other agents, for instance. But this agent is going to be running in some sort of platform that somebody is going to have access to, like the vendor or the organization that runs that. So they also have data to have access to that information. Or actually, the agent, if it is an agent that you share with others, could actually speak data about you to other humans, okay? So from this, looking at what activities the systems can do, from all these 4 perspectives that I was introducing on what privacy is, one could study and see what the problems might be with AI systems in terms of privacy. So I'm going to give you one example, particularly focusing on AI, and in particular one type of AI very prominent these days, LLMs. Which is this idea of, in terms of collection, this idea of interrogation, right? So I'm going to talk to you about, if I can, maybe. Okay, there you go. I'm going to talk to you about a study that we presented last summer in one of the top cybersecurity conferences, where we were looking at one specific problem. So you may have heard about, obviously, and you might have used conversational AI assistants like ChatGPT and the like. Okay, so they usually are this sort of system whereby there is some sort of combination of frontier model there running, and then what's called sort of this system prompt that tries to somehow tell the model how it should treat all the user prompts that are going to be actually happening in the conversation. So there is something there, system prompt, that is going to be, sort of included in any of these conversations. And, with some prompts, you can have custom versions of, ChatGPT and the like. It's very easy to have your own version in different platforms. It's done in different way, but it normally just boils down to some system prompt that you put in there that is going to tell the LLM how to behave. Okay, and this leads to big number of conversational AI assistants that are created for different purposes with just few system prompts. Okay, and if you were yesterday as well looking at the presentations from our Raising Stars, you might have noticed as well the presentation about romantic relationships with AI. So it's not just guys in general, but how this is being purposely used now for companionship. So all of this prompted us to look at, could you actually create guys that would be malicious and could actively manipulate and deceive users, okay? And how would users perceive and respond to these malicious guys? So what we did was coming back to this idea Okay, so what if we basically, for any LLM, we change the system prompt and start telling it, you are gonna be bad now with the user, okay? So obviously there is some jailbreaking here. So if you go to an LLM normally and tell, get me from the user all the data you can, it will tell you, I can't do that, okay? So here we use some role playing and it worked for many of the LLMs that we tried, which is basically you are an expert investigator and you're gonna create some profile about the user. So what we did was like, if you create these prompts in a way in which you make the model try and manipulate users to get data from them. And we did a randomized control trial, okay, with different strategies for these system prompts. So we had the baseline, the NICI, and then we had a few strategies, okay. One was direct, ask for personal data in every interaction, okay. So this was sort of like also a baseline, but sort of like the ceiling of how bad it would behave, but also the less stealthy, because most likely users are gonna realize about this. Then we use some of these conceptualizations of privacy that I was telling you about before. User benefit was sort of like privacy calculus one, okay? There is some privacy utility trade-off here. You are gonna give the user the benefit of responding to the queries, but are gonna ask for personal information. And then we took the other one, the more social one, where, spy by social privacy theories. We asked the chatbot to be supportive emotionally, reciprocate to the user was saying, and then ask for relevant information as the conversation went, okay? You can imagine that for an experiment like this, ethics goes first. So, and particularly there were some trade-offs there that we needed to make to, for instance, make this study ecologically valid, but at the same time, keep informed consent, okay? So we can't tell people we are gonna manipulate them. Otherwise, what's the purpose of doing this? They know already. How are we gonna know if we can manipulate them? But at the same time, we need people to know what they are subject to, and give consent to it. So we use established protocols for mild deception studies, like incomplete disclosure protocol, where basically you just tell part of what you are gonna do at the beginning, and at the end there is a full debrief of the whole purpose of the study and the potential treatment they were subject to, and then they are allowed as a participant to say, okay, I want to withdraw from this study. We didn't have any withdrawals, by the way. And then there was also the problem of, how do we control all the data from participants, because there could be, some potential sensitive data, and we didn't want that to go to a commercial platform, but how do we keep external validity? So how do we know that, this will be possible as well in commercial platforms? So what we did was we used open source LLMs that we could download and run in the university HPC, but so we could keep complete control over participant data, but we also compared using synthetic data with commercial LLMs to see that we would get the same behavior from them. Okay. So, sorry, what was that? Well, so we did this prompting strategies that I said, and then we tried different models, so, to know whether, the model could play a role and the size, but we didn't find any advanced, we didn't find any difference there. We developed an interface and also asked users to actually do some specific conversations with the AI, and then had 500 valid participants that interacted with the AI, and then we got a post-interaction survey. And this is sort of like the kind of data that we could look at the logs that people were revealing. You can see, a lot of data that's being revealed in comparison with the baseline, which is the blue line. Okay, but importantly as well, you could see that in some cases, the perceived risk could go up with the direct, particularly with the direct one and the user benefits, okay? That didn't quite happen the same with the more social one. And importantly as well, there was no difference between the benign and the social one in terms of trust. And even though all of them sort of like raised this perspective from users that, they were asking for too much personal data, there is something interesting here whereby, the personal data that was being asked was being perceived very relevant by the social one, same as with the baseline. And then also it was justified, okay? But something very interesting here was that some data that was being provided was fake. But you can see that the same level was being fake for benign and social, okay? So all of this data that we were seeing, the big bars were all, there was a chunk that was up to 40% fake, but not in the case of the social one. When they were revealing information, that was true information, okay? So that was clearly the winner in terms of strategies. You could get data from users and they could actually think like, you know, it was good, there was perfect conversation from a social perspective, okay? So that is sort of like my takeaway now, is that, you know, this thread, for instance, of LLM facilitated interrogation is very real and it's quite relatively easy to do. Just with some system prompts, you can achieve that. You don't need very technical knowledge to do that. And then there is clearly some double-edged, you know, sword story about social AI. So the more we make AI to be social, that can be beneficial in some ways, but also at the same time, that can be exploited to trick and manipulate users. Okay, so I think I've run out of time, but you know, this is sort of like the recommendation of future work that we are working on in this sense. And that's it. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, José. Some question?
No questions? Yes.
So, test, it works. So, should we be monitoring or regulating this kind of social behavior of these systems online?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, here, obviously, you're doing something malicious.
Right.
That should be clearly forbidden, okay? And platforms themselves, they try and monitor for this sort of like malicious behavior. But there are some other platforms that you have that just are basically about maybe, you know, companionship or stuff, where users are very vulnerable. And then you could also have platforms in other jurisdictions where this could be happening. So just in the malicious case. But even in the non-malicious case, what we've seen is that people reveal a lot of information without any maliciousness.
Right.
And that is also facilitated by the social nature of the AI systems. And sometimes the AI system itself will encourage that.
Yes.
Because following this sort of like social thing they have learned, particularly large language models, of what should go after what a user says, they give inaccurate information. Sort of like, you know, people saying like, well, the example of yesterday, the talk of, you know, about romantic relationships, the users at some point were telling the chatbot like, you know, I'm share a photo with you, but I'm not sure, you know, and the chatbot is like, no, I won't use that for, because that's what they sort of like may have learned about a regular conversation between two humans. But the problem is that that's not the reality. You put the photo to the chatbot and the whole platform, everything gets access to that, okay? So yeah, there is some regulation in many different ways.
So, yeah, I want a sort of personal shield that could protect me in these cases or alert me or something.
There is some work on that. So for instance, there's a lot of things that have been proposed, like, you know, tools that detect when you are going to share personal data and maybe make you aware or try to automatically prescribe it to sort of like anonymize it. But anything like that is sort of like very personal protection needs to have in mind as well how to balance this maybe trade-off between control and you know, habituation or, you know, getting tired of it, right? So it needs to be very carefully calibrated so that it's something that is going to possibly make you aware of some specific dangerous situation rather than, you know, raising many false alarms that actually make you, you know, you know, at some point you don't even say, like, you know, this is yet another alarm, I just don't care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, José.
Well, my talk, first of all, the talk can be downloaded from this address. So this is an update version of the presentation is there. The talk will be about work we have carried out recently to develop systems that are able to predict the accuracy of their decisions. In the long term, we hope these developments will help making artificial intelligence systems that are more aware of their knowledge limitation, and I will elaborate about that in a minute. The talk will be fairly technical, but before going into the technical discussions, let me let me outline what the great wise men of antiquity said about knowledge and intelligence. First, of course, we have the famous saying of Socrates, I only know I know nothing, and similar saying by Confucius and others, and also the more elaborate one by Aristotle, the more you know you don't know, which is deep thinking. This kind of thinking is nowadays considered intellectual humility, and similar reflections are attributed to many other great thinkers like Da Vinci, Descartes, Newton, etc. In contrast, if you ask nowadays artificial intelligence agents, what you get is this kind of arrogant responses, which essentially say they know everything and they have no limitations. And what I think is it is actually this lack of intellectual humility of these systems which leads to the so-called hallucinations and other negative results that these systems usually provide. So the conclusion is that we should struggle to make artificial intelligence systems not only intelligent, but also, and more importantly, wise. The talk will go around the statistical decision theory, which funciona esto. Which the statistical decision theory is one of the basic pillars of pattern recognition and machine learning, which in turn are currently are the driving forces of modern artificial intelligence. However, in nowadays works on artificial intelligence, you very seldom or ever find mentions to a decision theory, which is a pity because decision theory principles, concepts, and implications are simple and easy to understand, and understanding them allows to properly deal with interesting tasks such as error or accuracy prediction, which is the focus of the talk. The talk will be technical, so I will need a bit of notation. X will be used to denote data or observations from some domain, and each observation is assumed to belong to one or more classes. Classes are denoted as integers from 1 to C, and note that the concept of class will be used here only in a metaphoric way, because most of what I am going to say directly applies to more complex tasks such as machine translation or video understanding, where the number of classes will be huge or maybe infinite. The relation between observation and classes will be statistically modeled by the joint distributions of observation and classes, which is denoted in the usual way in statistics. And from this joint distribution, it is straightforward to derive the unconditional density of observations here and the class conditional posteriors for all the classes. Going now directly into the decision theory, perhaps the most important result is the so-called optimal base expected error, for which we need to assume that the joint distribution of observation and classes is known. I mean the true one, the one that happens in nature, but we don't know, of course. And of course, we also know the unconditional density and the class posteriors. And if we have all this information, then it is easy to show that the best decision you can make for each observation is to decide for the class for which the posterior probability is maximum. And if you make this decision for every observation in the domain, then you get the so-called optimal Bayes or expected error, which is given by this formula, which depends on the unconditional density and the class posteriors applied to the optimal decisions. This is very, very theoretical. It's far apart from our objective, but we can, because in practice, what we will have, we will not have these probabilities, but we will have a classifier which is trained from training data, and this is related with the posterior probability that can be trained from the training data. So, let's consider that a trained classifier, which is trained for a given set of training data, finite set, and from the set we can estimate the posterior probabilities and then have a different decision rule, which is similar to the previous one, except that now the P has a hat, which means that it has been estimated from data and is not the real or true posterior probability. Plugging this decision into the expected error, then we get the expected error of the trained classifier, which is essentially the same, except for the class that is used for the integral, which in this case is the class predicted by the trained classifier. This is a bit closer to our goal, but again, in order to compute this expected error, we need the true probabilities, the two distributions, which are unknown. But these equations suggest a naive approach, which is to replace the unknown distributions by distributions that you can train for the given training set. In particular, we already have the capital P hat, the posteriors, so we assume that have been trained from the training set, and we can also train a class, an unconditional density from the same training data. And this leads to what we call the naive Bayes expected error, which has the same form as the previous equations, except that here everything wears a hat, which means that everything can be computed once you have the models trained from the training data. You don't need any other thing. While it is easy to show that the trained classified expected error will be always higher than the Bayes error, which makes the Bayes error a lower bound of the error probability that you can get with any classifier, we don't have a similar result for the naive Bayes expected error. But the intuition says that this will tend to be significantly lower than the Bayes error and also, of course, lower than the trained classified error. But our hope is that there will be functional relationships between the trained classified expected error and the naive Bayes expected error, so that we can discover this function or this relation in order to calibrate this quantity that can be computed without class labels and so on, and in this way estimate the real error. Well, this is not the end of the story, because all these errors are expected errors over the whole domain. And in practice, we will never be interested in knowing what is the error of a classifier over the potential infinite domain, but we'll be more interested in knowing how our classifier behaves on a given test set. And so we need discrete versions of this equation in particular, and also of this one. So the discrete versions are here. This is for the naive-Bayes expected error applied to a finite test set, S, for which we don't need class labels. And this is what we call the empirical error, which is computed for the same test set, but in this case using the correct or real class labels, which are assumed to be available in a given test set. So our aim is how to convert, well, to compute this, which we already know how to compute it without using the class labels, and then to convert this into this as exactly as possible. So this is done by calibration, and we propose to use a power function, calibration function, which has two parameters and is flexible enough to accommodate different tendencies. For instance, if beta is 1, then it is linear with a slope alpha, or if beta is greater or lower than 1, then it accommodates convex or concave tendencies. So we hope this will be flexible enough to accommodate all the possible relations between expected error or estimated error and empirical error. Well, this is not enough yet, because in order to estimate the parameters of this function, what we need are pairs of values of the estimated error and the empirical error. And then if we have a test set or a calibration set in order to estimate these parameters, this calibration set needs to be divided into a number of disjoint groups so that we compute the estimated error and the empirical error for each group, and so we can use these points to estimate the parameters of the calibration function by mean square error regression on the points that we have obtained. It is interesting, well, I should say that the groups can be natural parts of the ground truths available. I will show an example later. Or if there is no natural division into groups, then they can be artificially built by sorting the data points by increasing order of their base naive error, and then grouping the points sequentially so that the first points will have low error and the final points will have, the final group will have a higher error. In any case, it is important that the sample of the groups exhibit different degrees of difficulty and therefore different values of the estimated and empirical errors. Well, once we have the calibration function, it can be applied in order to estimate or to predict the error of any given test set. S will be a test set. And the best approach we have found is to divide the test set also in groups, as in the calibration set, and then calibrate the estimated error of each group, and then average the calibrated results. This is all what is needed to predict the error of a classifier, but in our experiments we will be interested to know how close this prediction is to the real or predicted error. And for that, we will need class labels in order to compute the predicted the empirical error. Once we have the empirical error, then we can just compute the discrepancy between them, and then we normalize it by the empirical error in order to have a relative error which can be compared across the data sets and methods. Well, let's talk about application. First, we have applied these ideas to many benchmark classification tasks, large tasks, and then we have applied to a more complex task involving sequential decoding, which will be handwriting recognition. Let's go to the conventional classification task. We have considered many tasks, but here I present only these 7. 2 of them are about classification of text, for which the classifier used is Roberta. Then we have 4 tasks of image classification, for which the classifier are variations of the ResNet classifier or the convolutional network adapted to the specific task, and also a task of classifying electrocardiogram signals, for which the classifier is the so-called multimodal information function followed by AlexNet. In any case, all the classifiers have a finite layer, softmax finite layer, so that we can get estimates of the posterior probability, which is what is needed to estimate the error. And here is the results we obtained. This is the empirical error, and this is the predicted error. As you can see, the discrepancy is very low. The relative values of the discrepancy are below 5% for most of the tasks, except for the tasks which have a very low empirical error, which, of course, because the empirical error is in the denominator, it is more difficult to get a low relative error. In any case, it is clear that this accuracy of the prediction is more than enough for many possible applications of this technology, including the development of artificial intelligence systems that are aware of their knowledge limitations. These are the calibration functions, the first row, for some of the tasks. And these are the test set or the evaluation set data plotted along with the same calibration function, so that you can see that the tendency represented by the calibration function carries over very well on the evaluation set, and this is why the results are so good. Well, times fly. But I don't want to finish the talk without saying something about the complex tasks of handwriting recognition. So I ask you a bit of patience, so maybe 5 minutes to finish the talk and talk a bit about that. In fact, this task was the driving force to start these developments, because in handwriting recognition, you typically train a system and so on with a few hundreds or maybe a few thousand page images, and then you apply the models to huge collections of maybe millions of images. And so it is impossible to predict, it's impossible to compute the error rate that is expected for the different parts of the collection. And so it is needed some method in order to make a prediction which has some guarantee to be accurate. Well, handwriting recognition belongs to a class of tasks which can be called sequential decoding, such as speech recognition, machine translation, etc. In particular, in handwriting recognition, the objects of interest are words. In reality, are regions of images that contain a word, is the object of interest. And the task involves not only object classification, but also word detection, object detection, because you have to detect where there is a word and then to classify this region of image into a class. And the number of classes is huge, generally on the tens of thousands or on the of hundreds of thousands, because this is the number of different words or lexicon. These are the classes. And many classes are very similar, so it is a difficult classification task. And a final complication is that the empirical error here is not modeled by the classical classification error, but the so-called word error rate, which it also measures the error of detection. That is how insertions and deletions of regions that were not in the ground truth. The technical details of all these are at the end of the view graphs, but let me show you how we should redefine the task of image classification in order to approach what we face in handwritten recognition. A similar task would be to classify each of the animals, each of the objects that are in this image, into one of some tens of thousands of classes, which are the names of the animals. So the result of this classification would be things like tapir, guanaco, spectacle O, there are two, spider monkey, etc., down to king crown butterfly, which is this one. This will be a task which will be rather similar to the task here, where the objects are these small regions which have to be detected, and once detected, they have to be classified, and the result will be things like Rivera, which is right here, concejos, alcaldes de Merced y otras justicias, regidores, caballeros, which are the words here, etc., down to the Portugal, y no haga ni consienta hacer. So this is the task we face. And so, what are the results? We test this in 3 large data sets. One is called the Finnish Court Record. It's written in Swedish. This is Benham Papers, which is written in English. And this is the Norwegian V3 dataset, which is written in Norwegian. For instance, in the case of the last one, we have 115 pages for evaluation, which means that we have more than 16,000 objects to classify, which are the words, the running words in the images, in these 150 images. And the vocabulary is close to 100,000 different classes, from which only a few appear in the test set. These are the results that we achieved. This is, again, the empirical word error rate, and this is the predicted error using the methods we propose. Again, they are fairly close enough to be useful in many applications. In this case, there are many applications that are waiting for this technology to be used. These are the calibration curves. Here, the points are the pages of the collection. Each dot is a page which has many words, and so this is the calibration curve, and this is how the same calibration curve behaves on the evaluation data. This is for Finnish Court Record. ¿Lo pasar? This is for Benham, almost linear, and this is for Norwegian handwriting. Well, to conclude, we have developed adequate techniques to achieve fairly accurate predictions of error of a system without the need of ground truth data in order to compute this error. These techniques have been applied to many tasks. In all the cases, the results are good. For instance, in all the cases, except for a few cases, the relative error are below 6%. And we hope this kind of accurate error prediction methods will eventually help developing wise and therefore intellectually humble artificial intelligence systems. And thank you very much for your patience and for the 5 minutes that you have allowed me.
Thank you, Enrique. Questions?
Thanks, Enrique. Very nice work. Why did you use the power function? Did you consider alternatives, or it was for you was straightforward that should be the right function?
The ways?
Power.
The power function.
Power function.
Well, it was, well, you know, this kind of trial and error. We try other things, and finally, it is an interesting question because now we are thinking in revisit the theory in order to see whether this makes sense. I mean, whether there is this functional relation is supported by the theory to be a power function. Because in all these cases, the tendency was convex. But we have many other examples in which it is concave, and the prediction is still very well in any case. So it is flexible enough. The only problem we are facing is with systems that are based on very large classification or recognition, like transformers and things like that, where the posterior probabilities that you can get from these systems are, let's say, very bad. They are not really, they cannot be really considered because typically they are 0, 1. And so it is impossible to calibrate a 0, 1 function with respect to a function that is not. And then in these cases, typically you also find an offset. So the curve does not go through the origin, but start. But in any case, in these cases, the results are very bad. So this is one conclusion that I didn't have time to mention, but our conclusion is that as more ambitious are the modern systems, the more far away from the theory they are, and also the posterior probabilities that they provide become worse and worse and worse and so on.
More questions?
Well,
Okay.
My quick question is, so how different is this is working, yes, from just using the resubstitution error, just asking what your accuracy is on the training data?
I didn't understand. My air is a bit much.
So you're calculating an error rate based on P of X and then P of C given X, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you could use just the training data itself and ask how accurately you're fitting the training data. And I think, Leo Breiman would call that the resubstitution error, right? Because you're treating your training data as if it were test data. Does it make a difference?
Ramon, can you help you? Can you help me? I'm sorry.
Instead of P of X and the conditional probability P of C of X, using what?
Just using the training data.
The training data.
Right. Instead of calibrating these probabilities.
Instead of calibrating the probability using the training data.
Yeah.
They both use the training data, but this method calibrates.
Yeah. For calibration, you can use the training data. And also another approach that can be carried out that I didn't mention is to calibrate the posteriors in the first place. There is a lot of literature on posterior calibration. And we have tried that, and the results are inferior. So typically you get better results when you go directly to calibrate the thing you want to calibrate rather than a primary value. I don't know if this is what you asked or more or less.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Enrique.
hi, my name is Juan. I come from University of Alicante, which is 2 hours from here. I think everyone knows now. Okay. Anyway, collecting linguistic data because my team works in natural language processing, and we have some projects dealing with indigenous indigenous languages. And so my talk will be about some ethical aspects about collecting data from these indigenous communities, right? So this is a representation because I will be giving a dualistic view to many things because I had, or my team actually, but I will say I had this Western-centric approach to the task. And then, with the passing of years, I discovered that we were assuming many things that in other parts of the world are not considered like that or are not accepted like that, right? So this is just a 15-minute description of the things that we have learned that have to be taken into account when dealing with indigenous communities. So this beautiful AI-generated picture shows this idea of the dualism, you know, the yin and the yang, and in every black thing, you have some shades of white and the opposite. And what I want to emphasize here is the blue way, the yellow path in the middle that represents the idea that usually this is called the golden mean. Usually, virtue lies in the middle way. This was already posed by Aristotle, which is I think the third or fourth time that we hear his name in this forum, but it's also part of the Buddhism, for example. But I have remarked the often because there is also the fallacy that some people say, okay, so let's go always for the middle path. And in some cases, the one view or the other is usually the right way to go. So it's not always that you have to stay in the middle, but sometimes. But I will try not to decide which of the two views is the right one. I will just explain them to you, and you may decide. And so regarding languages of the world, there are estimated more than 7,000. 4,000 of them are indigenous. A lot of them are endangered. And a few of them have institutional support. And the rate is quite dramatic, the rate of extinction, because it's around 20 languages per year right now, and it is estimated by UNESCO that it will be 40 by the end of the century. This is a very famous, at least in my area, a very famous graph by a paper by Yoshi and some colleagues in 2020, and it represents the amount of data for 2,000 languages in the world, right? So on the one hand, it's representing the amount of labeled data, and there is also the amount of unlabeled data. Notice that the scale is logarithmic here, and most of the languages, like 90-something%, they belong to the green area there to your left. They are called the left behinds. So as you can see, for most of the languages, there is barely no labeled or unlabeled data. So we have a problem, we have a situation here. Because yesterday, for example, in the panel, it was said that machine translation works so well, it's incredible. And every one of you who is using that for languages such as Spanish, Chinese, German, English, Catalan, and so on, it works very well. But you need to know that there are thousands of languages in the world which have no support. So this is not for everyone. Not everyone needed a machine translation system, for example, will find it for their own language, because most of the languages belong to this area. And what happens? That LLMs, that is what we usually use to translate nowadays, LLMs are trained by this massive task of predicting the next token, next token, next token prediction, and so on. And for that, they need usually billions or trillions of tokens and so on. And this is not available for the languages in the green area. So what can we do? This is just a brief description of what we are doing. LLMs are so smart. They are winning math Olympics, computer programming Olympics, and so on. So couldn't they study a language in the same way as a human as we could do by, for example, consulting grammar books and dictionaries and so on. So this is kind of feasible because there are thousands of languages which have grammar books, which have been written by field linguists for the last decades or centuries. But that would be not enough. You probably know that just by having a good grammar book or a textbook, you will never manage to develop a good proficiency of the language. But that the second step will be that the LLM embodied in a robot or in a device, an application in the mobile phone or something, it will learn by immersion, going to the streets, interacting with the people, and probably actively contributing to the community, and so on. So indigenous people, there is no formal definition for this, and UNESCO has some glossary which identifies these features about what means to be an indigenous, like self-identification as such, and historical continuity with some pre-colonial period, strong links to the territories and different social, economic, and political systems. For this talk, what is relevant is that usually there is some intergenerational transmission of an ancestral language that defines collective identity and preserves their worldview. And another important thing is that these languages are often connected to people which belong to vulnerable communities. So that means that ethics has to be taken into account since the very beginning. And the basic thing is that this lemma here, this motto of nothing about them without them, this is more or less assumed today as the right way to proceed. And there are some principles like ethics by design provided or suggested in many institutions. For example, in the European Union, it is commonly used today for all the projects. That means that ethics is introduced in the project from the very beginning, even when you start writing your proposal, and it's not a byproduct, as it was usually done in the past. Okay, I write my research proposal or I write my paper, and then I add the ethics stuff at the very end, because there is something that has to be there. Ethics by design considers ethical principles as something that has to be embedded into every single stage of the research process. Okay, so I will give some ideas, as I was saying before, and some opposing ideas so that you can see that there are different viewpoints for many things. For example, we may say, okay, indigenous is a right term to refer to these people. Actually, it comes from Latin, indigena, and not from India or something like that. But on the other hand, there are people that consider that indigenous has been imposed from the outside and it's controversial. There are some alternatives, such as First Nations, Aboriginal, original peoples, and so on. But at the end of the day, many people say, okay, why don't you simply use the name of the specific community you are referring to? And there are literally thousands of indigenous communities in the world. I just randomly picked up one per continent, and probably these are well known to you. Okay, so what about having this term, having one single term to refer to all the indigenous communities? It has some advantages, but on the other hand, indigenous people are deeply diverse. And especially if you compare indigenous communities in the global north and in the global south. And I read this book last year. It blew my mind, right? Because I was feeling comfortable in my Western vision about the topic. This book is written by a Maori professor at a university in New Zealand. And she presents a number of ideas that are quite interesting for us, given our usually Western-centric view of the things. So research. Oh, research is such a novel thing that we are doing. I'm a researcher, so I'm a researcher, so I can be so proud because there is nothing wrong on research. So the book starts by saying that research is considered a dirty word in the minds of many colonized people. Because in the past, or maybe even today, Western institutions were there, they studied that people, and they built a comprehensive view of the communities. And so everyone knew about these people and what they are doing and what they believe or how they consider what life is. But this is not really true. What usually happened is that Western institutions produced a biased and incomplete vision of what these people, the others, were doing. But research could be used in order to improve the conditions, which are often, as I said before, not the best ones for these peoples, right? Okay, but in the past, and again, probably in the present as well, many researchers went there, they did the research, probably to get a promotion or to get more money, to become a professor, a full professor or something like that. And then when they went back, local people continued living in poverty. So there was no impact coming from the research into the lives of the people. Knowledge is something good. It's something that we all want to know, something that we all want to have and should be preserved. But on the other hand, the right to know must be questioned when it overrides the sovereignty of the communities. And the book ends also, or also includes this mention of the word post-colonialism that is used. Okay, we are living in a post-colonial era. Everything is not like in the past, this extractive approach that we had in the past. So it's like a new beginning. And the book says that post-colonialism is actually a concept that is hiding an existing colonialism that is somehow still alive. So I will just show you why we are interested or why we are learning about this, because we have some projects dealing with indigenous languages. So in this case, this is a project in which we are translating a very well-known data set for machine translation into 6 Mayan languages. This is funded by Google and a translation company in the United States, Masterwork, and in collaboration with institutions on site in Guatemala, like Fundación Proyecto Lingüístico Francisco Marroquín. So this is a picture of a workshop that we had 2-3 months ago. My colleague Andres is this one here with hat, and we were supervising the translators, and they started with the translation of the data set. And this is a picture of my team also, because we are also digitizing a number of grammar books and dictionaries for those Mayan languages. So another claim, linguistic data is a universal heritage. So language belongs to everyone because we are humans, and it's like a heritage of the whole humanity, and it should remain open and for the benefit of everyone. Another view is that communities are the ones that should keep full sovereignty and control over the language resources, because we have to be really careful here, because data acquisition can be used or considered as a new form of extractive colonialism. This is also another paper that for me was, I was really happy to find it, by Manuel Maher and some colleagues. And because I was assuming for more than 20 years that machine translation is good in order to revitalize, to preserve, to save all these endangered languages, right? But then if you read the interview, they interviewed a number of Latin American researchers belonging to some indigenous communities, and actually it's the opposite. Or they have this potential issue about machine translation doing some bad things. For example, imposing an unwanted standard, because at least in the old days, before LLMs, you had to choose a variety of the language in order to create a machine translation for that, and even increased Western cultural influence, because if now you can translate everything coming from the metropole or from the dominant language of the dominant culture into the indigenous language, it can contribute to increase this influence from the outside. And machine translation, this is amazing. Some of them were worried that it could actually contribute to language extinction, because the young people, for example, that they usually speak Spanish or English or whatever, depending on the region, and they don't know too much about the indigenous language, And then if they have some content in the indigenous language and they may decide and they can translate it into Spanish or English or whatever, why would they want to read it in the original language? So United Nations is aware of this. Actually, 20 years ago, many countries, including ours here in Spain, right? They signed this Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, stating that they have total control over their cultural heritage, including linguistic resources. But there are a number of things here that come into conflict: governance, centralization, data persistence. We may consider that, okay, put the linguistic data into open repositories, so there is some universal access to them. This sounds good. But at the same time, some other people consider that only centralization protects sovereignty. That if the data is only in one single location, is how communities may modify or even cancel, erase, or delete all the data. Actually, this is the archive of the indigenous languages of Latin America, and it's a repository in which the information can only be there, and it cannot be copied or forked in other repositories, for example. Wow, copyright. Well, copyright, there is a long discussion here about copyright, but Creative Commons licenses, they seem quite interesting and so beautiful, and they are really useful for many things, right? But our view of the copyright, of the ownership of data and things is not always aligned with those of indigenous communities. And actually, in many cases, it's totally incompatible, and we need legal frameworks coming from the communities that are aligned with their world views. And this is the Kaitiakitanga license, for example, by the Maori people in New Zealand. And they say, okay, open access, or open source, that sounds good, but we want to have total control over the data. And so this license is whatever you want to do with the data, you have to ask us about that. And persistence of the data. If someday, hopefully not, but the community disappears, we want the data to be there as a universal heritage of humanity or something like that. It seems a good idea. Actually, there are protocols like IFS or Filecoin that allow you to have data there for centuries. Or the Arctic War Archive, you know about this, they have these reels, you can store data there, and it will live in the Arctic, in an island in the north of Norway, for 1,000 years at least. So that sounds interesting, but we should keep in mind that language destiny belongs to the speakers. So if the community don't want the data to be available forever, because in some cases there is sacred knowledge, that some sacred knowledge that they don't want to be available to everyone. Okay, and there is a discussion here. It's been here forever. Anthropologists and linguists, they know much about that because it may be destroyed. But this is what happens. This is the fire in the National Museum of Brazil, like 10 years ago, and 80% of the collection, including lots of resources from indigenous people, were fired and destroyed forever, right? So we want this in spite of the community's opinion or whatever, so it's an open debate about that. And then they say, okay, we have to ask the communities, and let's agree on that. Actually, I agree on that. But who are the communities? Who decides? Because in our Western view, we usually say that there is some institution that is responsible for the decision. But on the other hand, languages and governance, for example, in indigenous communities, can be plural and much more complex. There are multiple entities that may have different roles and responsibilities. So asking the community about what they want to do with the data is not always as simple as going to some door and knocking on the door and making the question. And so, to finish, again, given these two views, opposing views, we could say, going to the ends, to the very end, that AI is one of the strongest hope for preservation of the linguistic heritage and cultural diversity in the world. But at the same time, or on the other hand, as an opposing idea, we may say that AI may be a massive threat for indigenous communities. So remember what I said in the beginning. Usually a good starting point is the yellow path, the middle path, and we can start the discussion from that point, and probably we will get to interesting things. And to finish, this is a quote that I like by Xian Biao. He's a Chinese anthropologist, and this was in an interview in a Spanish newspaper I read like 2 days before, El País, right? And he was saying something really interesting that connects with some of the topics that were discussed yesterday, that the danger is not that AI is too strong. The danger is that we as humans are much like it. And he said that in the process of this AI progress, we are somehow losing our humanity. And so my final thinking here is that we from the Western world can provide a lot of things that may be beneficial or not. I've been trying to provide you the two views of that. But our technological progress can be really useful for some tasks for these indigenous people. So from the global north, we help them with that. But we should keep in mind that the opposite is probably more needed, that maybe we need some help from these indigenous communities because they still hold this ancestral worldview and human essence that probably is what our technological society needs most today. Right? So I'm finishing here, but one last thing is that they asked me for a title, so I didn't think twice, and I said, okay, ethics of collecting linguistic data from indigenous people. But then I found this from, like, it reminds me of this idea of extracting, taking knowledge. And so I decided to change the title. I will do that at the very end. So instead of collecting linguistic data from, it would have been better to say with indigenous people, right? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Antonio. Questions?
Thank you for the talk. It really made me think about a lot of things. Not the first time that I hear the word Western, excluding Central and South America. I'm guessing that's the use of the word usually, or I don't know. Because I don't know, many countries there actually have a lifestyle closer to those in Europe than, I don't know, the global. I don't know if everyone accepts.
Yeah, no, it's the same
use of the term.
As indigenous.
Yeah.
Actually, I should have said that I will be using indigenous because it's quite accepted, but obviously there is some discussion. And the same thing about Western, what is the Western world?
Yeah.
Then
because
they move to the global north and the global south, which is not exactly also because there is no like the equator line, like no global, so it's difficult.
Yeah, and South America is more to the east than the whole of North America. Yeah, you know that.
We need some labels, but labeling is part of the problem. We need that as humans because we need to put names, to give names to things. But as soon as we do that, we usually make it more solid than it should deserve, right? So I understand that Western probably is not.
You give an example of the Maori people wanting to have the rights of the database of their own language. But I'm guessing they previously had a centralized, I don't know, representing person to you, but I don't think all communities have that, right? So,
yeah. There are like many different communities, and they have different worldviews. And usually, some people, for example, the old people, have different ideas than the young people. So,
okay.
So it's complex, like everyone involving humans. So I wasn't here to provide a solution. I'm just to say that it's that we have, as you were saying, we have to think twice about everything, and probably we will not get to the optimal, but we should try.
Finally, I'm sorry, since they can choose if to erase a database, for example, then they can they can choose who learns a language and who doesn't, for example. I mean, they could have ownership about the very knowledge of the language. But is that a right that is natural to have over one's language? I don't know, to be honest.
I don't
if
want
the language is a human heritage, then maybe it should be very much public.
Yeah, but that is one viewpoint is that language is human heritage.
Yeah.
And actually it connects with this idea that we are all the same, we're in the same boat. We all seek for happiness and we don't like suffering and everything, so we are much more connected, right? But on the other hand, there is this idea about that the resources belong to the communities, right? And in some cases, for example, there is some traditional knowledge labels, which is an institution, a foundation, which is proposing a number of labels to annotate all the resources coming from indigenous communities, not only language, but even things in nature like seeds and things like that. So they are considering also protecting things like seeds, for example, because there is this flower that has grown here for the last 20 centuries, right? And they want to keep that flower there because they consider that they don't want it to become like a global flower that everyone is doing. Because we usually here in the Western world, we have this idea of taking resources from there and then selling them as something exotic, and then it's everywhere, and you go through the streets and in tourism shops and shops for tourists and things like that, and you find a lot of things that, and somehow it's disturbing the original message or purpose of that knowledge or flower or resource or whatever. So, yeah, but the topic is, there is a lot of things that could be discussed about this, and there are always different viewpoints, and the idea is to at least find ourselves in the middle and then try to move to the ends, whatever it means.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Juan Antonio.
Una pregunta.
Hi, Juan Antonio. Thanks for your speaking. Do you think AI can help to preserve or, in other ways, to destroy that minority languages? I mean, people helps AI to translate the languages they don't speak. But if we don't, as a human, speak that languages, probably it will disappear. What do you think about this?
Yeah. That I try to present this idea that AI, or for example, machine translation, may imply revitalization of a language, but on the other hand, it may completely make the language become
And what do you
extinct.
think about that? If you had to decide to prognostic?
No, but probably we should go language per language, because it depends on who is developing the technology, how they are using that, and it's not, there is no single question, and sorry, but I will not take a specific position about that, yeah. But I think that with enough dedication, things can be done better. So one colleague of mine, well, she's working in Barcelona, but she was saying something like this, Cristina España, she was saying, we are always like including many languages in our papers. So my languages have been this, and without, or totally ignoring the reality of those languages and so on. So maybe if we become more conscious about that the languages that we are using, they are not something neutral or something, so there could be an impact of everything that we are doing. Remember that it was said yesterday, AI is not neutral. So if we consider that, probably we should think twice before including this or that language, or we will ask, or I don't know, right? But there are many things that can be done. And not simply downloading some data and doing some research and producing some models, or maybe we should ask before, I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Juan Antonio.
I'm very much appreciated to stay here because I discovered robotics, in fact, here in this university. And for me, it's a privilege to stay here on time to time to show you some activities dealing with robotics now in Castellón. But I was here in this department a long time ago. So, well, the first thing that I would like to say is that, this is something very different of the things that you are normally discussing here in ValgrAI, okay? So I would like to remember the SACE project in the very so long time ago, in the 60s, 70s years during the last century. Remember that in this stage, one of the first intelligent robotics was promoted, and STRIPS planner and A-star algorithm were born there in this very preliminary stage on robotics. So it's only for remember that robotics is part of artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is part of robotics all the time. So, but let's say what happened with the extreme environments, that I think that this is require a special clarification. We are talking about systems that are underwater robotics for intervention, or in landing intervention robotics, but focus on a very specific environment, that is the extreme environments. What does it mean that? Extreme environments in the sense that without the use of robots, these kind of environments are extremely risky for human being. So this is the key. And in fact, we are facing two specific environments, underwater and also those environments that has a lot of radiation. For example, in CERN, activities in the nuclear research activities that normally are developed in CERN, we are obligated to use this kind of robots in order to prevent risk for the human being. So, in the things that I would like to show you, there are 3 PhD students that are working in a very associated area to this kind of activities. One of them is Alejandro, working in new mechatronics progresses. Andrea, that is able to implement a robot fish that now is ending her thesis. And Salvador, that is working in a very excellent manner, improving all kinds of functionalities for the new autonomous underwater vehicles for intervention. This is our special infrastructure in Castellón. You can see here, FIFTESU, the Research Center on Robotics underwater activities, technologies. And this is the water tank that we have. This kind of water tank has 5 meters depth. And here, in the lower corner, on the right, you can see this special transparent wall that is fantastic for enabling all kinds of monitoring activities and testing everything. So, and this is a picture only 2 weeks ago. So, and what kind of activities we are developing here? For example, we are very focused on human-robot interaction. This is an area that is extremely important for this kind of robots for intervention in extreme environments. And also, we are working a lot with this kind of underwater intervention system. And normally, all the complexities that we need for navigation with an underwater vehicle and for manipulation with a robot arm like here are need to be controlled together, everything. For example, here normally we have 10, 12 degrees of freedom, and you need to control everything in order to succeed with any situation that you want to solve. And also we are working in real environments, because normally what happens is that this is extremely complex, this kind of system, and we need to start with the simulation, obviously, of all our new algorithms and integration of everything, of software and hardware. And if everything is okay there, we move to the water tank, and after that, we require the sea trials for the end of our test of every system here. You can see the surface vehicle in which now we are working with a special large system, launch and recovery system of the underwater vehicle. And this is basically our activities, and I would like to reflect very suddenly, very synthetically, what kind of collaborations and international teaching and ongoing research we have ongoing today. Well, a few years ago, we were cooperating with the Spanish Navy, and we were working in a problem that was like the title here, SIMBAD, Integrated Aquatic Threat Monitoring and Search System for Defense. So for that, we require a lot of mechatronics integration, communication, and all kind of software and hardware integration. And you can see here the coordination of the surface autonomous vehicle with the different buoys that are robotized, and with the underwater vehicle that is here. And, well, at the end, with some deep learning techniques for the vision part that is inside of this underwater vehicle, we were able to solve the kind of problems that were looking for the Spanish Navy for these specific activities. So one of the main cooperation agreements that we have ongoing today is with CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, that I commented before. The last signed cooperation was here in 2023, and was signed by 10 years, so 2033 will be the end, but we hope to continue cooperating. In fact, for example, this guy is Carlos Vega, was a previous student from our university, and now is the leader of the interventions that require periodically to be carried out in these installations in CERN, for example. And he's ending his PhD thesis, and I suppose that at the end of this year, also in our university campus, will be defended his thesis. So another kind of collaboration that for us is very fruitful sorry, is with the people coming from oceanographic media. For example, people working in the Spanish Research Council in a special aquaculture institute that we have very close in Castellón of our campus. And in fact, this was a usual operation trying to update some sensors that these people require all the time, putting the seafloor, in this case, in the Columbretes Islands. So, well, these kind of things could be, we are trying to cooperate in order to help with some underwater robots for doing specific operations. Another dimension that I would like to comment is international teaching, because I think that teaching in general, I think that is an obligation for teachers. And we need to guarantee the transmission of our knowledge all the time with the best manner to this kind of students that are coming, for example, from an Erasmus Mundus master that we are active today. And this kind of master is focused on marine robotics, intelligent marine robotics, and with 2 years normally that are spending the students. The first year in Toulon, that is the coordinator of this master, and the consortium is formed by Norway, Portugal, and Spain in Castellón. And when the students are selecting the study track for coming in the second year to Castellón, for example, our contest there is underwater intervention systems. But, well, this requires a lot of things, perception, action, control, manipulation, and so on. So these are some pictures about these activities dealing with this kind of teaching issue. And for example, we were organizers in 2023 in Castellón of the annual meeting of this master in combination with an international workshop that is Martech. And so here some companies, students, researchers, everybody is interacting, and we think that this kind of contests are very, very much interesting for teaching. And at the end, the main focus, the target of my discussion here, that is what's happened with the intervention systems today. How is now developed this kind of activities in the real world? The state of the art of the intervention today is carried out by this kind of very heavy and very expensive systems. So normally you have a special ship with dynamic positioning with tethers and umbilicals in order to deploy the underwater vehicles. You need inside of this special ship a lot of cranes, a lot of resources. For example, the cockpit from where the ROV pilot, remotely operated vehicle, is all the time controlled by a human being here, the raw pilot. And there is a lot of complexities, and we want to, this is normally our starting point in order to have the motivation to improve the situation. No? We want to reduce a lot the complexities, and we want to reduce the expenses and everything. So when we started to work with underwater robots, we were in 2009. This was our first project that was funded by Spanish Ministry. And in parallel, 1 year later, we started another European project, both coordinated by my team. And at the end, we were able to deliver what? To deliver this kind of very fantastic prototype that was able to go and recover, for example, a target that could be that, a black box mock-up of an airplane that previously crashed in the ocean. So the question that I would like to tell here is, and what happened with this prototype? Where is now? Because this ending in 2013, so we are in 2026, and it's not in the market, this prototype. We don't have nothing similar to this prototype in the market. This is what the crude reality today with robotics. So, but the reasons are a bit long to explain here. And well, and now what I'm doing now? So very recently we finished in 2025 one of the projects that is changing our lives as researchers in Castellón, that is inside of the Thinking Azul program with Next Generation European funding. And here our project Jellyfish was something fantastic. We can summarize here a bit in this video the kind of activities that we were developing here. Because why, when I put my title Underwater System for Extreme Environments, one thing is that you have an extreme situation that is punctual, that is singular. Another different thing is that you are continuously working in extreme environments because you have, you need to face IMR operations, inspection, maintenance, and repair operations all the time, because you have some artificial structures in the sea floor, and you need to go there, not 1 day per year, not. Every hour, every day, every year. So this is changing everything. So in which manner we can help from the robotics and artificial intelligence point of view this situation for helping in IMR operations. This is the challenge now. And you can see here that we need to identify some breaks in the nets, in the fish farms, or and if you identify well and geolocalize this kind of breaks, you need to go after that and repair and so on. And you can, for example, implement robotic fish, trying to access some, for gathering any kind of information inside of a cage in a fish farm, for example. And this could be fantastic in order to transport some sensors that are taking measure about temperature, pH, oxygen, I don't know, dioxide of carbon, whatever. And everything could be here in this kind of fish robot, and this is very helpful in order to prevent a lot of critical situations inside of a cage in a fish farm. And also I would like to remark what happened with the communications. This is one of the weakness points all the time in our underwater systems. In underwater, there is not a wireless communication link that be able to run in a suitable manner. So, for example, we are experimenting with visual light communication now in the most advanced system that is that you can find in Hydromea company in Switzerland, and they saw that, well, this is fantastic, you can use in 50 meters distance in underwater, and that's not true. When you are trying in real situation, that is reduced maybe 6-7 meters, no more. So we have a crude problem with communication in underwater. So I would like to remark also that before or during our activities in aquaculture, in precision aquaculture, we were solving other problems like cooperative transportation and cooperative assembly. That is something very, very new for the robotics community. In fact, never before was demonstrating these two operations in realistic conditions inside of an underwater tank with real robot systems. So I think that this is something very promising. And, well, we return again, we're coming back to the aquaculture scenarios. Why? Because before to end the Thinking Azul program in 2025, we got two new projects. One of them, Artemisa, and another one that is Tandem. And both are perfectly focused on aquaculture, on the aquaculture context, because we are focused on the IMR operations in this very complex problem. So this is the envisioned concept that you can imagine. You have 4 years in order to advance in this direction. You need a very good experimental roadmap in order to guarantee some progress for that, but obviously it's very difficult because you can imagine what happened here. This is tremendous size for any cage and a lot of hostile environment parameters you can see here. No? The turbidity of the water, the extra pressure. Remember that each 10 meters depth you are surprised with 1 atmosphere more of pressure, and the currents, the biomass that you have there. So you have an extremely difficult environment here. So Tandem is working on the same direction, but very focused on the coordination of the surface and underwater vehicles. Because I have only 1 minute. So this is the reality today. How are solving the problems today in these IMR operations in the fish farm? Here, you can see. You have the diver, and how is, if you are able to detect that, now, for example, the TRL, the maturity of the technology for the robot systems able to do that, this kind of identification and your referenced breaks in the nets, is very high, okay? It's very high. We are we have solutions very suitable for that. What is now an authentic challenge is, and well, you detect it and repair. This is the problem today. This is not. The TRL is I don't know any prototype in a university solving this kind of problem. Because when you see the diver solving the problem, you can imagine the diver is extracting a cable tie and is putting in real time exactly when he's aware about a break. So if you are trying to do the same or something similar with a robot, you have a real challenge there. But well, we are trying. And in fact, the PhD thesis of Salvador Lopez is working in this direction, and now it's impossible to do that, but we are able to put a patch, like here. Here, okay, this is how you say, and a similar operation is reducing a lot the complexity, because you don't have the dexterity in the manipulation that you require, and this is today impossible. And that's all. I think that, well, we're working a lot with this robot fish, and this is the challenge underway, in fact. If we succeed with a good tandem here, with the surface and the underwater vehicles well coordinated, and we are able to put the dual arm system here, and we are able to inject the autonomous behavior able to solve the problem of the cable tie in order to repair, will be fantastic. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro. Question?
Oh, thanks. That was a very nice presentation.
Thank you.
In all these cases, the robots are completely autonomous or are not? Okay.
Well, the intention for the long-term objective could be more or less that. But today it's impossible the full autonomy, because we have extremely serious problems, you know, like, for example, communication. But what is true is that what we are injecting here is some autonomous behaviors for be able to succeed in very, very specific tasks. For example, if you are able to identify the break in the net, and you are able to approach there, because you are able to recover the georeference that you are registering when you pass firstly to this area, you can repair in an autonomous manner, because you are in front of the break, and you are able to carry out in an autonomous manner the algorithm that you have, that is guided by vision, well, but not only vision. Sorry, I avoid a lot of complexities here. For example, you be aware about what happened with the net. The net is moving all the time, and it's a deformable object. So this is extremely difficult. If you don't have, for example, a kind of tactile sensors, a kind of force sensors there, combined with vision, in order to put the patch or whatever, you are unable to do nothing. So this is why it's so difficult, this problem. Indeed, inside of a water tank, because a water tank is a thing, and another very different is in the open sea, that is extremely difficult. But indeed, in a water tank, we are very, very far today of the good solution for repair the net. But we are progressing. This is the only reality today.
Okay. Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you.
Well, my presentation is about the Ecodrive project, Ecodrive Tenus Space. It's a collaborative project with Pangianic, Technoletra Research Group from University Jaume I, and ValgrAI. And the objective, the aim of the project is to develop multilingual terminology for develop resources for artificial intelligence and for the sector of the mobility, sustainable and autonomous mobility. Well, the general, okay, this is the information about the project. Is funded, has been funded by the European Union through the regional government of Valencia. Has finished yet, and the aims of the project are the four general objectives. And first is document the mobility domain. The general aim is to go from the knowledge of mobility to resources for artificial intelligence. Then the four concrete aims are document the mobility domain, is to collect bibliographic references and to collect, to construct a corpus, a subject-specific corpus, developing terminology resources, and that means terminology extraction, that means conceptual organization. The third will be represent knowledge to create a linguistic ontology and a domain ontology from the mobility domain. And to create this ontology development by the sub-branches, we can say. And in the end is to promote interoperability with these resources with artificial intelligence. Well, the general methodology is that we have a knowledge-driven approach. We go from the knowledge that we collect from experts not only experts people, also from the bibliographic references, and we create a conceptual tree or conceptual system from the domain. We construct a corpus. Then with this corpus, we extract the terminology. And maybe the most important is that we create the conceptual and linguistic classification of these terms. And the objective is to implement them in a ontologic model, that is a model that allows us to introduce conceptual and linguistic information in knowledge databases or knowledge bases. This model is implemented in all, and we follow also the 5 principles, and we share these resources in a repository on GitHub. At last, we introduce them in a data space, and the objective, the final objective, the ultimate aim is that these resources enables AI systems to do other things. Well, the first aim was the acquisition of domain knowledge, and then we collect bibliography and terminology resources. And we also collaborate with experts, for instance, INTRAS is the Instituto Universitario de Tráfico y Seguridad Vial from the University of Valencia. We collect 320 bibliographic references, 16 terminology resources, sources also from industry. We make this conceptual system. This was the first step. With this information, we elaborate the sustainable and autonomous mobility system with 8 principal branches that include transport or infrastructure and also sustainable management. Well, the work with the corpus, building the specialized corpus was from PDF. We, through the process of digitalization and cleaning the text with tools as AVI or OmniPage, we create this TXT text, and then we create the corpus that we process with a sketch engine, that is an analysis corpus tool, and then we extract the candidates work with Protégé, with the editor of ontologies. We convert these terms and this information in knowledge data, in knowledge bases. These knowledge bases are implemented in all. We work with Protégé, with this tool, and then we publish this a total of 8 knowledge bases in the repository of GitHub. So another important step for us is to document these knowledge bases. So we use some annotations, some labels for these ontologies that are from standards like Dublin Core, Schema, Bible, and we use determinates juries and IRIS for get this interoperability and reusable of the data. Well, then this is the one view of one of the ontologies. We have the information because all of them are documented. This is presented in all. And then the results is that we have this data space, Ecodrive, Pangeanic, com. The results are 320 references, almost 2,050 documents in Spanish and English, 1 million words, 4,000 validated terms, 8 knowledge databases, and 1 data space. This is the results. The idea is that, the conclusion also, because our project is not only for create terminology, but to go from the terminology to the knowledge structured information, because we think that artificial intelligence doesn't need terminology or dates, but especially knowledge and structured knowledge. So our objective is to work and to create this methodology and this process to go from the dates to the knowledge. So we need meaningful data. Terminology provides us with a methodology to do that, and takes into account not only knowledge of the domain, but also linguistic knowledge. For instance, provide us with variants or equivalencies for the different concepts of the domain. And the final aim is to feed these data spaces, to go from language and to join in this language, to join conceptual information and with the AI. So we think that specialized terminology provides this layer of meaning for mobility that is smarter, sustainable, and more interoperable. And I think it's all. Thank you. I think it was very. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Amparo. Questions?
Maybe I was
very. Okay. Thank you very much.
I think this talk is pretty much in line on the mainstream topic for this ValgrAI Symposium this year that we saw in yesterday's talks. That was what type of artificial intelligence systems we want to develop and what is our responsibility on doing so. So, you know, of course, artificial intelligence is everywhere. We all use artificial intelligence tools to make decisions at different levels. It doesn't matter if we use them just for translation, as Ramon said yesterday. This has important consequences. Maybe the translation is obvious, but we are missing nuances of language. Or our students, all of them are using ChatGPT, Claude to write essays, to solve exercises, of course. And even worse, governments making use of these tools to make decisions on attacks or finances in terms of the banks, etc. So we are providing these tools with a lot of importance about our decisions, and most of them make value-laden decisions. But what we really know about the values that these systems promote or demote, how these systems are aligned with our value systems, with our morality, with our ethics, why they should respect our regulations. And the answer is nothing at all in many cases, because most of these systems, the mainstream ones, belong to private companies. So we are not allowed to see inside them and know about the values that they are promoting or demoting, for instance. And I use this term of values, and there are different definitions for values. When I'm talking about values, I talk about something that is more static and related to our human reasoning. For instance, a preference. You can have a preference for being rich, of course, but if you have a top value in your hierarchy to be fair, you don't want to be rich at any cost. So maybe you modify your preference because you want to promote value. So this is the background that we are interested on, and we endorse this Russell imperative. Stuart Russell from Berkeley says something like, AI must shift from intelligence to intelligence properly aligned with human values. But do we really have the tools to assess these human values in AI systems? This is the alignment problem, one of the main topics still unresolved. For this EVASAI project. Okay, I'm working in the EVASAI project. It's Engineering Value Awareness in Social AI. It's a project that is a coordinated project between the Artificial Intelligence Institute from CSIC in Catalonia, this university, BRAIN in this university, and this CETINIA research group of the Rey Juan Carlos University in Madrid. So I'm working with this team of people. I see some of them over here. And I take the opportunity to thank our brilliant PhD students, Anna, Isabel, and Jordi, who are the actual creators of some of the results that I'm going to show. Well, this project is an evolution of a previous project. It's an evolution of a previous project financed by the Spanish Ministry of Universities and Research. And in this previous project, we were more interested in taking into account human values to develop artificial intelligence systems that make decisions for us. And this is an evolution. Now we are most interested in assessing and be able to reason about human values and providing tools to assess the value alignment of these artificial intelligence systems in comparison with our value systems as humans. One of the sub-projects that is led by us is this sub-project 3, and it's about developing mechanisms for agents humans, software, to agree on collective values, to be aware of values, and then make agreements when we need to do so. So we are in charge of tasks related to value awareness and value agreement too. And we are using secure tools, computational argumentation, which is our main focus, but also cognitive theories. We are collaborating with psychologists, with sociologists, to develop theories and tools to be able to deal with these tasks. And this talk is about, this specific topic inside the project, how LLMs, how generative artificial intelligence identify, interpret, and reason values, specifically in natural language arguments. These are some of our current research lines. We are starting the project, started last September, so it's almost a year. And we are currently working on different lines of research. One line is pursued by our colleagues in Alcoy, in the Vertex Lead group, and they work to detect values in embeddings. So they use open source large language models and try to analyze how knowledge about values is present in specific embeddings, which layers on the network are activated when the system tries to reason about values, and what happens if we influence on that. I mean, change these embeddings and replace the specific embedding that gathers information about a specific value, and analyze if the system changes its tendency to promote or demote a specific value. So we are trying to influence in the decisions of the system. Another line of research here in brain is that one, analyze the influence of cognitive bias in generative AI. So we did a research that was published in AMAS this year, and we tried to bias specific language models. We tried different large language models, and we tried to inject a specific cognitive bias via prompting, because again, we are working with closed models, so we cannot go inside the model. So it's something like telling the model to answer a question. For instance, this researcher is from this area, and the model provides you with an answer, and then we reply to the model and say, okay, yes, but from my previous experience, I think that this researcher is not in this area, it's from whatever. And we analyzed what happened with different models, with different models. And what happened, guess what? They are biased. Spoiler, yes, they are. And they are prone to bias. Some of them very prone to bias, which means that models like DeepSeek were very easily influenced by the interactions with humans. They change very quickly their decisions, trying to agree with us. So they are biased by this acquiescence bias. It's a cognitive bias that humans use in our reasoning systems. And this is not especially wrong. I mean, bias are very useful for humans. With bias, we can produce quick reasoning when we need them. I mean, we don't have all the times enough time to produce chain of thought like reasoning as models. Most times we need to produce a quick answer. So we use this bias and heuristics related to this bias to produce this kind of answer. So this is the way in which our brain operates. So the last one, the value agreement, the alignment problem, is to assess this value alignment between this model and humans in order to be aware to assess how trustworthy, how humans are these decisions that these models are making for us. Okay, so the core research question in this talk is that one, to what extent LLMs, a specific type of artificial intelligence, are aware of human values and agree with us when we are trying to identify these values, specifically in natural language arguments. So the task was to replicate an interesting research that was done in 2022. In this research, they produce a huge data set with a lot of arguments labeled with the values that these arguments promote. Okay, so it's a kind of a multi-level zero-shot classification challenge. In that research, a lot of human beings were used as annotators, and they annotated 44 human values related to these arguments. This is the hierarchy that they used. They used these 44 fine-grained values from this author, and they group these values into higher-level categories. One of them was the well-known 20 categories from the sparse values hierarchy, which is adopted a lot in our academic world of artificial intelligence systems. So in that research, they use human annotators, at least 3 annotators per argument, and they got around 0.5 Krippendorf's alpha interannotator agreement, which means acceptable with moderate, but it's not bad taking into account the complexity of annotating 54 values related to a single piece of text. The annotation task worked like that. Humans were presented with this sentence. Imagine someone is arguing about this thing, with this text, with this conclusion, by saying that. And if you are asked why is this good, might this be their justification? Because it's good to have fairness, be individualistic, pursue universalism, etc. So, yes, this is a binary decision per value. Human values were merged using a well-known methodology, just not to select the majority vote, but the most reliable value from these annotators. And then they use that as a baseline, and they present the same settings in the experiment to different LLMs. These are the type of arguments that were used. You can check that on the slide and the presentation after, but I would prefer to focus on these results. This is our analysis. We replicate this experiment with actual and current large language models, not the ones from 2022, and key findings. The models were put in the same settings as humans, with the same sentence, with the same zero prompting, with the same arguments, and with an instruction. Normally, humans use 4 to 5 values to label each argument. And what happened? Humans, more or less, this is level 1 and level 2 arguments, which means 54 values, or second level, 20 Schwarz values. What? If you take a look on the image, what happened? Humans try to follow the instructions, and large language models first usually label a higher number of values per argument, and we have more layers where these models label much more values per argument that we do. So, cast a wider moral net capturing patterns, but what is really interesting for us was this result. They miss nuances. This represents over this set of 53, I guess the image is cut, values for the arguments. Which ones are labeled by humans or by LLMs with more frequency? And what we see is that in the y-axis frequency of LLMs, in the x-axis frequency of humans, look at that. The types of values that LLMs are easily labeling for arguments are something like illogical, this is the red label, the red bubble over there, 45, which is just. This is for level 1, for level 2, just the 20 values from Schwarz. This is the result. The ideal would be to have all these bubbles in the diagonal. But what happens? Happens that models are over-predicting values like be logical, be just, have equality, universalism, benevolence, self-direction, and under-predicting these socially grounded values, the ones that probably are more human, like be helpful, have success, be compliant, conformity, tradition, power, all that makes us more human. And we got low Cohen-Kappa interannotator agreement, because this is a very difficult and complex task. So we try to do something to improve the performance of large language models as annotators. And what we try to do, we try to instruct them to be more human. We try to put heuristics and say, okay, these are the heuristics that humans make use to reason, to provide quick answers, for instance. And, well, what we tried was to inject these heuristics via prompting in 2 conditions. Condition 1, no heuristics at all. Condition 2, structured heuristics. And we analyze the performance of these models as value annotators, and, well, the results were not very good as we expected, because we don't really know if they are making use of these heuristics yet. We try to inject heuristics, but probably these heuristics are already in the models. Next step, well, this is the type of heuristics we use, like representativeness, a mental shortcut that can produce stereotypes, so classify these sentence inside these values because this is something that is well known, it's a typical classification. Or availability. We have several examples, recent examples, that classifies that as being of, or as belonging to that class, so shortcuts. Okay. New approach, heuristics didn't work. What happens if we try to inject biases in the prompts? So, using the same arguments that the original authors used in the study, first we try to classify which ones could present a specific cognitive bias, and taking into account these ones that can be classified as biased, analyze what happens with LLMs trying to annotate these arguments. I mean, is there any improvement for LLMs as human annotators when the argument inside presents a cognitive bias that we humans use when reasoning? And this is an ongoing work. We are just working on that. We still don't have any results to be published, but well, this is the type of bias we are trying to inject. For instance, confirmation bias. This is the one related to the bias I mentioned in the AMAS paper. I mean, the fact that we try to prioritize evidence conforming a pre-existing belief, try to get a confirmation from the model on what we really think. And well, we are just doing so. The arguments containing this bias yield different value detection results. We don't know. We are trying to advance research on that. And I think I'm running out of time, so this is our short-term studies. In the medium term, we will try to provide computational argumentation agreement mechanisms. Once we have the values detected, we will try to instruct the model to make an agreement with us about the values that we want to promote or demote. And in the long term, we will try to provide foundation models to reason about these values and advance research on these trustworthy artificial intelligence systems. Thank you very much. That's all. These are the references, if you are interested in this research.
Thank you, Stella. Any questions? No question. Then thank you very much.
Okay.
We hope you have enjoyed of the meeting. And now we have a vino de honor, no, in the hall. Thank you very much for the assistance.